There's something about stormy nights that brings out the worst in people, and the worst in situations. When the rain is pounding against your windows, when the thunder is drowning out every other sound, when the power goes out and you're left alone in the dark, that's when the truly disturbing things happen. Tonight, I'm sharing 3 stories that were sent to me by viewers who experienced some of the most unsettling encounters of their lives during violent storms. These are their words, their experiences, and unfortunately for them, their reality. Let's begin. Story 1. The neighbors offer ***. This first story comes from Sarah, who was 19 at the time and living alone in a small apartment complex in Oregon. It was late October, and the Pacific Northwest was getting hit with one of the worst storms of the year. Sarah had just moved into her ground-floor apartment a few weeks earlier, and she didn't really know any of her neighbors yet. The building was old, probably built in the 1960s, with thin walls and even thinner windows that rattled with every gust of wind. Around 9 p.m., the power went out. Sarah wasn't too worried at first. She had some candles and her phone was charged. But as the hours passed, the storm only got worse. The rain was coming down so hard it sounded like someone was throwing handfuls of gravel at her windows. The wind was howling through the trees outside, and every few minutes, she'd hear the crash of a branch falling somewhere in the distance. That's when she heard the knocking. At first, Sarah thought it was just the storm, maybe a loose shutter or something banging against the building. But then she realized the sound was too rhythmic, too deliberate. Someone was knocking on her door. She grabbed her phone's flashlight and approached the door carefully. Through the peephole, she could see a man standing in the hallway. He was probably in his 50s, wearing a dark raincoat that was dripping wet. She'd seen him around the building before, but had never spoken to him. "Who is it?" she called through the door. "Hey there, neighbor," the man replied, his voice muffled by the storm outside. "I'm from apartment 3B, just down the hall. Listen, I noticed your lights went out too. I've got a generator running in my place, and I thought maybe you'd like to come over until the power comes back on. It's pretty cold out here." Sarah hesitated. On one hand, her apartment was getting colder by the minute, and she could see her breath in the flashlight beam. On the other hand, something about the situation felt off. Why would this stranger, who had never even said hello to her before, suddenly be so concerned about her welfare? "That's really nice of you," she said through the door, "but I'm okay for now. Thanks, though." There was a pause. Then the man spoke again, and this time his tone was different. More insistent. "Come on, don't be stubborn. It's going to be a long night, and it's only going to get colder. I've got hot coffee, blankets, and the heat's working great. You don't want to freeze in there, do you?" Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Something about the way he said, "freeze in there," made her skin crawl. She looked through the peephole again, and the man was standing closer to the door now. Too close. "I'm really fine," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Thank you for the offer, but I'd rather stay in my own place." Another pause. Longer this time. Sarah could hear the man breathing heavily on the other side of the door, and she realized he was probably listening as intently as she was. "Sarah, right?" he said suddenly. "That's your name, isn't it?" Her blood went cold. She had never told him her name. Her name wasn't on her mailbox yet, and she'd barely spoken to anyone in the building. How did he know? "Look," he continued, "I know you're new here, and I know you don't have family in the area. Your lease application was, well, let's just say information gets shared around here. You shouldn't be alone on a night like this." Now Sarah was genuinely scared. Not only did he know her name, but he apparently knew personal details about her living situation. She backed away from the door and grabbed her phone, ready to call 911. "I need you to leave," she said loudly through the door. "Right now." She heard him chuckle. It was a low, unsettling sound that seemed to echo in the hallway. "You know what, Sarah? You're being very rude. Here I am, trying to be a good neighbor, trying to help you out, and you're treating me like some kind of criminal. That hurts my feelings." Sarah was already dialing 911 when she heard the sound that made her heart stop. The man was trying the door handle. She watched in horror as it turned slowly, testing to see if the door was locked. Thank God she had engaged the deadbolt when she moved in. The handle rattled more aggressively now, and she could hear the man muttering something under his breath that she couldn't quite make out. "I'm calling the police," she shouted. Suddenly, everything went quiet. No more rattling, no more muttering. Sarah pressed her ear to the door and listened. She could still hear the storm raging outside, but the hallway seemed silent. The 911 operator answered, and Sarah quickly explained the situation. The operator told her to stay on the line and that officers were on their way. But with the storm, it might take a while for them to get there. Sarah spent the next 20 minutes huddled in her bedroom closet, phone in one hand, kitchen knife in the other, listening to every sound in the building. The storm was so loud that she couldn't tell if the man was still out there or if he had left. When the police finally arrived, they found no sign of the man in the hallway. They knocked on the door of apartment 3B, but no one answered. When the building manager let them in the next morning, they discovered something that made Sarah's blood run cold. Apartment 3B had been vacant for 3 months. The previous tenant had been evicted, and no one new had moved in. The apartment was completely empty. No furniture, no generator, no signs that anyone had been living there. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. When the police checked the apartment's maintenance records, they found that the previous tenant, the one who had been evicted, was a man named Robert Chen. He had been evicted for stalking and harassing other female tenants in the building. And according to the building manager, Robert had somehow gotten hold of rental applications for new tenants, including Sarah's. He had been coming and going from the building even after his eviction, using a key that he had apparently copied before turning in the original. The police never found Robert that night, or any night after. The building manager changed all the locks, and Sarah moved out 2 weeks later. But before she left, she learned something that still haunts her to this day. Image 5, Storm Night Dread. The woman who had lived in Sarah's apartment before her had also been young, also lived alone, and also had been approached by a helpful neighbor during a power outage. That woman had accepted the offer to come to apartment 3B. She was found 3 days later in the building's basement storage room. The cause of death was never officially determined, but the case was ruled suspicious. The police file mentioned that she had been reported missing during a severe thunderstorm, after neighbors heard what sounded like furniture being moved around in the vacant apartment upstairs. Sarah still wonders what would have happened if she had opened that door. And on stormy nights, she still checks her locks twice before going to bed. Story 2. The Road Home. This second story was sent to me by Marcus, who was 23 years old and working as a delivery driver in rural Tennessee. It was a Tuesday night in November, and Marcus was finishing up his last delivery of the day. He worked for a local pharmacy, delivering prescriptions to elderly customers who couldn't make it to the store themselves. It was good work, and it paid decent money, but it meant driving on a lot of back roads in areas where cell service was spotty at best. The storm had been building all day, and by 7 p.m., it was in full swing. The rain was coming down in sheets, and the wind was strong enough to rock Marcus's small sedan as he drove. He'd made his last delivery to an old farmhouse about 20 miles outside of town, and now he was trying to get back to the main highway. The problem was, he had taken a shortcut through some backwoods roads that he wasn't entirely familiar with. During the day, it had seemed like a simple route, just a series of connected country roads that would cut about 15 minutes off his drive time. But now, in the dark and the storm, everything looked different. Marcus had been driving for about 30 minutes when he realized he was lost. The roads all looked the same, narrow, winding, lined with thick trees that seemed to close in around his headlights. His GPS had lost signal about 10 minutes earlier, and his phone showed no bars. That's when he saw the headlights behind him. At first, Marcus was relieved. Another car meant he wasn't completely alone out here, and maybe the other driver knew these roads better than he did. The headlights stayed a consistent distance behind him, maybe 50 yards back, following his same route through the winding roads. But as the minutes passed, Marcus started to feel uneasy. The other car was following him perfectly. When he slowed down, it slowed down. When he sped up, it sped up. When he turned, it turned. It was like the driver was matching his every move. Marcus decided to test his theory. He deliberately took a random left turn onto an even smaller side road, one that clearly led nowhere important. The headlights followed. He took another turn, this time to the right, onto what was barely more than a dirt track. The headlights followed again. Now Marcus was starting to panic. He was lost, alone, with no cell service, and someone was definitely following him. He tried to get a look at the other vehicle in his rearview mirror, but the headlights were too bright and the rain was too heavy. All he could tell was that it was a larger vehicle, maybe a truck or SUV. Marcus pressed harder on the gas pedal, hoping to put some distance between himself and his pursuer. His car slipped slightly on the wet pavement, but he managed to maintain control. Behind him, the headlights kept pace. At first, Marcus was relieved. Another car meant he wasn't completely alone out here, and maybe the other driver knew these roads better than he did. The headlights stayed a consistent distance behind him, maybe 50 yards back, following his same route through the winding roads. But as the minutes passed, Marcus started to feel uneasy. The other car was following him perfectly. When he slowed down, it slowed down. When he sped up, it sped up. When he turned, it turned. It was like the driver was matching his every move. Marcus decided to test his theory. He deliberately took a random left turn onto an even smaller side road, one that clearly led nowhere important. The headlights followed. He took another turn, this time to the right, onto what was barely more than a dirt track. The headlights followed again. Now Marcus was starting to panic. He was lost, alone, with no cell service, and someone was definitely following him. He tried to get a look at the other vehicle in his rearview mirror, but the headlights were too bright and the rain was too heavy. All he could tell was that it was a larger vehicle, maybe a truck or SUV. Marcus pressed harder on the gas pedal, hoping to put some distance between himself and his pursuer. His car slipped slightly on the wet pavement, but he managed to maintain control. Behind him, the headlights kept pace. The clerk pointed out the window. Marcus followed his gaze and felt his blood turn to ice. The dark pickup truck was parked across the street, just outside the reach of the gas station's lights. It had been there the whole time, watching. "That truck been following you?" the clerk asked. Marcus nodded, unable to speak. "Well, you can't stay here all night," the clerk said. "I close up in about an hour. But I tell you what, there's a back road behind the station that connects to Route 40. It's not marked, and most folks don't know about it. You could try taking that way." Marcus bought the phone charger and a cup of coffee, stalling for time while he tried to figure out what to do. The truck hadn't moved. Whoever was inside was clearly waiting for him to leave. Finally, the clerk came over to him. "Listen, son, I'm going to give you a 5-minute head start. I'll go out there and pretend to check something on one of the pumps, see if I can get a look at who's in that truck. While I'm doing that, you slip out the back door and take that road I told you about. Drive fast, and don't stop for anything." Marcus nodded gratefully. The clerk handed him a piece of paper with rough directions written on it, then walked outside toward the pumps. Marcus watched through the window as the older man made a show of checking the pump equipment, moving closer to the street where the truck was parked. That's when Marcus made his move. He slipped out the back door of the gas station and got into his car, starting it as quietly as possible. The back road the clerk had mentioned was barely visible, just 2 tire tracks leading into the woods behind the station. Marcus followed it, driving without headlights for the first 100 yards to avoid being seen. The road was rough and narrow, winding through dense forest. Marcus had to drive slowly to avoid hitting trees or getting stuck in the mud. Behind him, he could see no sign of the pickup truck's headlights. Maybe he had lost them. After about 15 minutes of careful driving, the back road finally connected to a paved highway. Marcus recognized it immediately. It was Route 40, exactly where he needed to be. He was so relieved that he almost cried. But his relief was short-lived. As he merged onto the highway and started driving toward town, he saw something in his rearview mirror that made his heart stop. Headlights. The same headlights that had been following him before. Somehow, the truck had found him again. Marcus floored the gas pedal. His small car wasn't powerful, but it was faster than the pickup truck. He managed to put some distance between them, but the truck was persistent. For the next 20 miles, it stayed behind him, sometimes closer, sometimes farther, but always there. Finally, Marcus saw the lights of town ahead. He drove straight to the police station and pulled into the parking lot. The pickup truck drove past without stopping, but Marcus got a partial look at the license plate. He immediately went inside and filed a report. The next morning, Marcus called the gas station to thank the clerk for his help. The phone rang and rang, but no one answered. Worried, Marcus drove back out to the station later that day. What he found there still gives him nightmares. The gas station was closed, the windows were boarded up, and there was a "for sale" sign in front. When Marcus asked at a neighboring business, he learned that the gas station had been closed for over 6 months. The previous owner had died of a heart attack the winter before, and no one had reopened the business. The clerk who had helped him, who had given him directions and possibly saved his life, couldn't have existed. But Marcus still has the piece of paper with the directions written on it, in handwriting that definitely wasn't his own. The police never found the pickup truck, despite having a partial license plate number. But they did confirm that there had been 2 missing persons cases in that area recently, both involving people who had been driving alone on stormy nights. Marcus still works as a delivery driver, but he never takes shortcuts anymore. And on nights when storms roll through Tennessee, he makes sure to finish his deliveries before dark. Because he knows that somewhere out there, on those dark country roads, someone is still following lost drivers through the rain. Story 3. The Basement Door. This final story comes from Emma, who was 16 years old at the time and babysitting for a family in suburban Michigan. Emma had been babysitting for the Hendersons for about 6 months. They were a nice family. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson were both in their early 40s, and they had 2 kids, Tommy, who was 8, and little Susie, who was 5. The Hendersons lived in a big colonial house that had been built in the 1920s, with hardwood floors, high ceilings, and all the character that comes with an old house. Emma usually enjoyed babysitting there. The kids were well behaved, the pay was good, and the Hendersons were never out too late. But there was one thing about the house that had always made her a little uncomfortable: the basement door. It was located in the kitchen, just a plain wooden door that led down to the basement. Nothing unusual about that, except for one thing: it was always locked. Emma had never seen it opened, not once in all the months she'd been babysitting there. When she had asked Mrs. Henderson about it once, the woman had just said that they used the basement for storage and preferred to keep it locked for safety reasons. Fair enough, Emma had thought. Old houses had old basements, and old basements could be dangerous. She never thought much more about it. Until the night of the storm. It was a Friday in March, and Mr. and Mrs. Henderson were going to a dinner party at some friend's house across town. They expected to be back by midnight, maybe 1 a.m. at the latest. The weather forecast had called for rain, but nothing too severe. Emma arrived at 6 p.m., just as the Hendersons were getting ready to leave. The kids had already eaten dinner, and the plan was for Emma to supervise their bath time, read them a bedtime story, and make sure they were asleep by 8:30. Everything went according to plan at first. The kids were in good moods, bath time went smoothly, and they were both tucked into bed by 8:15. Emma settled into the living room with her homework and turned on the TV for some background noise. That's when the storm hit. It came out of nowhere. 1 minute it was just a light drizzle, and the next minute it sounded like the house was under attack. The wind was howling so loudly that Emma could barely hear the TV, and the rain was pounding against the windows with a force that made her wonder if the glass might break. Around 9 p.m., the power went out. Emma wasn't too worried at first. The Hendersons had shown her where they kept flashlights and candles, and she knew the kids were heavy sleepers. She found a flashlight in the kitchen drawer and lit a few candles in the living room, then settled back down to wait for the power to come back on. That's when she heard the sound. It was coming from somewhere in the house, a low, rhythmic thumping. At first, Emma thought it might be a loose shutter or a tree branch hitting the side of the house. But as she listened more carefully, she realized the sound was coming from inside. Thump, thump, thump. It was slow and steady, like someone knocking on a door. But not a normal knock. This was heavier, more deliberate. Emma grabbed her flashlight and decided to investigate. She checked on the kids first. Both Tommy and Susie were fast asleep, undisturbed by the storm or the power outage. The sound wasn't coming from upstairs. Emma made her way back downstairs, following the thumping sound. It seemed to be coming from the kitchen area. As she entered the kitchen, the sound became clearer and more distinct. Thump, thump, thump. It was coming from behind the basement door. Emma stood in the kitchen, flashlight in hand, staring at the locked door. The thumping continued, steady and persistent. It really did sound like someone knocking, but from the other side of the door. From inside the basement. Emma's rational mind tried to come up with explanations. Maybe it was the old furnace acting up because of the power outage. Maybe it was pipes rattling in the storm. Maybe it was just the old house settling in the wind. But then the thumping changed. Instead of the slow, steady rhythm, it became more urgent. Faster. More insistent. Thump, thump, thump. And then Emma heard something that made her blood run cold. A voice. Muffled and distant, but definitely a voice, coming from behind the basement door. "Help me." Emma dropped her flashlight. It clattered on the kitchen floor, the beam spinning wildly before settling in a corner. In the sudden darkness, the thumping seemed even louder. Thump, thump, thump. "Help me, please." Emma fumbled for her flashlight, her hands shaking. This couldn't be real. There was no way someone was in the basement. The Hendersons would have mentioned it if they were expecting anyone. And how would anyone have gotten down there? The door was locked. Unless someone had been down there all along. Emma grabbed her phone and tried to call the Hendersons, but she had no signal. The storm must have knocked out the cell towers. She tried the landline, but it was dead too. The thumping was getting more frantic now, and the voice was becoming clearer. "Please, help me. I can't. Get out." It sounded like a man's voice, middle-aged, desperate. Emma approached the basement door cautiously, her flashlight beam trembling in her shaking hand. Who's down there?" she called out. The thumping stopped. For a moment, everything was silent except for the storm raging outside. Then the voice came again, closer to the door now. "Thank God. Someone's here. I've been trapped. 4 hours. The door won't open." Emma stared at the door handle. There was a key sticking out of the lock. She had never noticed it before. Had it always been there? "Who are you?" Emma asked. "How did you get down there?" I'm a repairman, came to fix the furnace. Earlier today, the door must have swung shut and locked. I can't get out." Emma's mind was racing. She didn't remember seeing any repair truck when she arrived. And surely the Hendersons would have mentioned that someone was coming to work on the furnace. "What's your name?" she asked. There was a pause. Then the voice came back, a little less desperate now, a little more calculating. "My name is David. David Morrison. I work for Henderson Heating and Cooling. Please, just turn the key. Let me out." Something about the way he said, Henderson Heating and Cooling, sent chills down Emma's spine. It sounded rehearsed, like he had prepared that answer. "I need to call the Hendersons first," Emma said. "To make sure it's okay." The response was immediate and angry. "No. Don't call them. Just let me out. I've been down here for hours. I'm claustrophobic. I can't breathe." The desperation in the voice had turned to something else now. Something that sounded almost threatening. Emma backed away from the door. Every instinct she had was screaming that something was wrong. Very wrong. "I'm sorry," she said. "I can't let you out until I talk to the Hendersons." The man behind the door let out a sound that was part growl, part laugh. "You little bitch," he said, and his voice was completely different now. Cold. Menacing. "I know you're alone up there. I know the kids are asleep upstairs. I know the Hendersons won't be back for hours." Emma's blood turned to ice. How did he know all that? How did he know she was alone? How did he know about the kids? "I've been watching this house for weeks," the voice continued. "I know all your routines. I know when the parents leave. I know when you put the kids to bed. I know everything about this family." Emma was backing toward the living room now, but the voice seemed to follow her. "You know what, little girl? I changed my mind. I don't want you to let me out anymore. I want you to come down here. I want you to unlock that door and come down into the basement with me." Emma turned and ran toward the stairs, but the voice called after her, louder now, as if the man was pressing his face right against the door. "I know where you live, Emma. I know what school you go to. I know your parents' names. If you don't come down here right now, I'm going to find you. I'm going to find your whole family." Emma reached the top of the stairs and immediately checked on the kids. They were both still fast asleep. She locked herself in Tommy's room with them and tried to think of what to do. She couldn't call for help, she couldn't leave the kids alone, and she couldn't get the man's threats out of her head. How did he know her name? How did he know so much about her family? For the next 2 hours, Emma sat in that bedroom, listening to the storm outside and the occasional thumping from the basement. Sometimes the man would call out to her, making more threats, describing what he was going to do when he got out. Other times, he would be silent for long stretches, and somehow that was even worse. At midnight, Emma heard the sound of a car in the driveway. The Hendersons were home. She had never been so relieved to hear anything in her life. She ran downstairs to meet them as they came through the front door, soaking wet from the storm. "Emma, thank goodness you're okay," Mrs. Henderson said. "The roads were terrible, and we couldn't get through on the phone." "How were the kids?" "They're fine, they're sleeping," Emma said quickly. "But there's something else. There's a man in your basement. He says he's a repairman, but I think he's been lying. He's been threatening me." Mr. and Mrs. Henderson looked at each other with an expression Emma couldn't quite read. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't concern. It was something else. "A man in the basement," Mr. Henderson said slowly. "Yes, behind the locked door. He's been down there for hours. He knows things about our family, about me. I think he's been watching the house." Mrs. Henderson put her hand on Emma's shoulder. "Emma, honey, there's no one in our basement." "But I heard him. He was talking to me, threatening me." Mr. Henderson walked into the kitchen and came back a moment later. "Emma, look." He was holding the key to the basement door. The same key Emma had seen in the lock earlier. "This key hasn't left my pocket all evening," he said. "And look." He walked back into the kitchen, and Emma followed. Mr. Henderson put the key in the lock and turned it. The door opened with a loud creak. Below was a wooden staircase leading down into darkness. Mr. Henderson shone his flashlight down the stairs and called out, "Hello? Anyone down there?" They went down into the basement together. It was a typical unfinished basement, concrete walls, exposed beams, furnace and water heater in one corner. There was nowhere for anyone to hide. And there was no sign that anyone had been down there recently. "But I heard him," Emma insisted. "He was talking to me for hours." The Hendersons exchanged another one of those looks. "Emma," Mrs. Henderson said gently, "this basement door has been warped for months. Sometimes, when the humidity changes during storms, the wood swells and the door makes noises. Thumping, creaking, and the way sound travels in old houses. Sometimes it can sound almost like voices." Emma stared at the empty basement. Had she imagined it all? Had the storm and the power outage and her own fear made her hear things that weren't there? But she remembered the threats so clearly. The man had known her name. He had known about her family. "I swear to you," she said, "someone was talking to me." Mr. Henderson put his arm around her shoulders. "You've had a scary night, and storms can make anyone's imagination run wild. Why don't we call your parents to come pick you up?" Emma nodded, but as they walked back upstairs, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The Hendersons were being kind, but there was something in their manner that didn't seem quite right. Over the next few days, Emma couldn't stop thinking about that night. She kept going over every detail in her mind, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had she really imagined it all? A week later, she got her answer. Emma was at the grocery store with her mother when she saw a familiar face on a missing person poster taped to the window. It was a man in his 40s, with dark hair and a thin face. The poster said his name was David Morrison, and that he had been missing for 2 weeks. David Morrison. The same name the voice in the basement had given her. Emma stared at the poster in shock. According to the information printed below his picture, David Morrison was a repair technician who had been doing service calls in the area before he disappeared. His truck had been found abandoned on a rural road about 10 miles from the Henderson house. The poster said that David was known to suffer from claustrophobia. Emma never babysat for the Hendersons again. She told her parents she was too busy with school, but the truth was that she couldn't bring herself to go back to that house. Every time she thought about it, she remembered the desperation in that voice, the pleading, the terror. And she remembered how quickly that desperation had turned to anger when she refused to open the door. The Hendersons moved away 3 months later. Emma heard through the neighborhood grapography that they had sold the house very quickly, to a cash buyer who planned to renovate it extensively. David Morrison was never found. His case remains open, but the police have no leads. Sometimes, Emma wonders what would have happened if she had turned that key, if she had opened the basement door that night. But mostly, she tries not to think about it at all. Because deep down, she knows that David Morrison really was in that basement. And she knows that the Hendersons knew it too. The question that keeps her awake on stormy nights is simple. If David was trapped in the basement, why didn't the Hendersons want her to let him out? And what happened to him after she left? 3 stories from 3 different people, all connected by one thing: storms that brought out the worst in the people around them. Sarah's fake neighbor with his disturbing knowledge about her personal life. Marcus and his mysterious pursuer on those dark country roads. And Emma's night with a voice from the basement that may have been more real than anyone wanted to admit. Which story scared you the most? Comment below and subscribe for more true horror stories. And remember, the next time you're alone during a storm, pay attention to the sounds around you. Because you never know who might be watching or listening.